Well, g'day and welcome to Northern Illawarra Uniting Church, our sermon for November 5th. It's good to be with all of you. Today we're studying a new series and we're going to be looking at one of the strangest books in the Bible. And to be honest, the Bible has a lot of strange writings in it. It's an old, strange book with one of the strangest characters in all of the Bible. We're going to be looking at the writings of the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel. Why would we look at Ezekiel? There's so many great, accessible, practical parts of the Bible. It's really common to ignore Ezekiel. You may have never heard a sermon on this ancient prophet, although he's one of the major prophets. Why wouldn't we just focus on a more immediately useful passage, preferably short, one clear enough to put on a coffee mug? That's how often we approach the Bible. Well, today I want to look at this strange passage of scriptures over the next few weeks as well, because sometimes we need strange. We need the kind of art, the kind of language, the kind of beauty that opens up our world and helps us to understand the things that are impossible to understand. Like Madonna said in her 1984 song, Like a Prayer, life is a mystery. And we know this, right? Birth is a mystery. Death is a mystery. Life is a mystery. The whole story of the human race, in many ways, is full of mysterious events. And anyone who's studied the universe or biology or chemistry knows that the universe we live in is a mystery as well. The more scientists, ironically, come to understand the world around us, the more it feels like the world we live in is actually truly astonishing. You know what I'm saying? There are moments in life that feel so complex, so confusing, so perplexing that the old rules and the simple explanations no longer work. There are times when we become aware that life is strange. But you and I are not comfortable with strangeness, right? Most of the time we just get on with it. We build homes, we raise families, we make coffee and tea, and we just generally live our lives. And most of the time, life doesn't feel mysterious at all. Sometimes it feels, maybe most times it feels predictable, even boring. And I think we live in a world, a culture that likes boring. We live in a secular culture that has been steadily downplaying mystery for a long time. In our worldview, we've separated the mystery of life, the divine, the spiritual, the mysterious, from the visible and the manageable world. The sacred, the spiritual, it's too unreliable, too strange, too mysterious. And as we look at the world around us, sometimes we see the violence and the disruption that religion and spirituality cause. Better to stick with what we can explain. So we have learned, we have desired to minimize mystery in our lives. And with the gifts of science and technology, we've learned to manage our world quite well. Let's just keep life at that manageable level and leave mystery alone. But there are consequences to leaving mystery out of our lives. When we give up on mystery, when we give up on the spiritual, we lose much of what makes us human. Think about it, some of the things that are most important to us, justice and beauty and love, spiritual character, these things can't be explained by science. They certainly can't be managed. And as we've given up our approach to mystery, we've lost much of our ability to consider and wrestle with these things. Corporations and governments only consider the bottom line. Morality and justice have no place at the shareholders' meeting. You'll notice that schools have given up on character formation, the deep inner lives of students. They're more interested in just keeping it practical. Let kids figure out themselves what they believe. Our technology has improved, that's certainly true, but it seems to make our lives smaller, our imaginations more market-driven and capitalistic, not larger. And even our churches, I think at times, have focused more on the practical than the beautiful and the true. I think we are all trying to make life less strange, and it leads to a shrinking of our imaginations. But here is the good news. Despite trying to push mystery out of our lives, to manage our lives without it, mystery keeps breaking in and messing with our lives. We encounter experiences that shake and break us, experiences that move us to wonder and weeping, things we can't explain or even comprehend, experiences that shatter our old understandings and take us out of the world, the managed world we live in, and shunt us into another world where things no longer make sense. And it's in those places that our imaginations start to have to be re-examined. They need to be renewed. And this is why we listen to the prophets. This is why we go to those parts of the scriptures that are strange and in some ways hard to understand. The prophet is the expert in the strange and the mysterious. The prophet is compelled to point out the inconsistencies and the complications of our well-managed world. They stir things up and compel us to look deeper. Now, in our world, the word prophet often means people who predict the future, Nostradamus and the like. But in the Bible, prophets are less interested in the future of our plans and more focused on the invisible reality that is always true and will always be true. The invisible reality that's all around us. Justice, love, beauty, God. Prophets bring back the strange realities into focus, and prophets often arise when the world we see falls into disrepair in some way. So that's why I think we should look at Ezekiel. It is a strange book, and you'll see even as we begin reading it, just how strange it is. And we'll only scratch the surface over the next 3 weeks. But I think as we read Ezekiel, it will give us the insights to navigate the strangeness and the mystery that keeps breaking in on our lives. So let's look at Ezekiel, the prophet. You may not have ever read it before, and we'll see how his journey begins. Chapter 1, verse 1. I'll put it up on the screen. In the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the exiles by the river Chebar, the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim. The word of the Lord came to the priest Ezekiel, son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and the hand of the Lord was on him there. Okay, so this is just the introduction. We find Ezekiel sitting by the river Chebar, which is in the empire of Babylon, and he is just sitting and listening, and there he sees visions of God. And we get 3 really interesting details about Ezekiel's life in this first passage here. We find out where he is, we find out what he does, and we find out how old he is. Where is Ezekiel? He's by the river Chebar in Babylon. And what this tells us is that Ezekiel is actually a refugee. In Bible history, in 597 BC, the Babylonians entered into Jerusalem, laid siege, attacked the city, and instead of destroying the city, they took about a third of the rulers and the leaders and the elites out of Jerusalem and moved them to Babylon. The king got taken, the princes got taken, and some of the priests got taken as well. And Ezekiel was one of those young people who was taken into exile out of his homeland and placed in Babylon by the river of Chebar. This is the beginning of what's now known as the Jewish diaspora, and this is why we see Jewish people all over the world, often sent out by violence and invasion. So Ezekiel is no longer settled in his homeland. The Jewish people have been scattered and his culture has been threatened. Ezekiel's world and how he understood the world has been shattered by exile. His world has been turned upside down. We also learn that Ezekiel is or was a priest. In Ezekiel's day, priests were central. They had a central role in the society around them. They had a clear role to offer sacrifices, pray for the people, and tend to the temple. But he's been taken away from the temple. He's no longer able to serve as a priest. There are no sacrifices, and he can no longer go into the temple. The role that he trained for his entire life, the world that he was supposed to live in, it's gone. His life and his work have been shattered before it ever really began. Ezekiel's personal life, his career, his trajectory has been turned upside down as well. And finally, we learn that Ezekiel is 30 years old. His life in many ways was just supposed to be beginning. 30 was the age that you officially got ordained as a priest. And so at this moment that should have been the beginning of his managed life, He now looks at a world around him, a life before him that doesn't make any sense. Ezekiel began his life with a defined role, a managed world, and a clear trajectory. But Ezekiel's managed life did not go the way it was supposed to. He has become strange to himself. He's a stranger in a strange land. Maybe you felt that way sometimes. Maybe you're an immigrant. Maybe you've had a time when you thought you were supposed to go in this direction, but your career fell apart, your family fell apart, your life became strange to you. For Ezekiel, it's this moment of strangeness when God first shows up. And it's an incredible experience. I want to read now the rest of this first chapter. I'll take some bits and just sort of summarize it a little bit. But this is a remarkable chapter. I want you to listen to it closely because it's really strange. It's really weird. But I think if we read it carefully, we can see some of the power of what God offers us when life is strange. Let me read it for us. As I looked, a stormy wind came out of the north, a great cloud with a brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually. And in the middle of the fire, something like gleaming amber. In the middle of it was something like 4 living creatures, but they were of human form. Each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures, one for each of the 4 of them. And as for the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl. And the 4 had the same form, their construction being something like a wheel within a wheel. And when they moved in any of the 4 directions without veering as they moved. Their rims were tall and awesome. For the rims of all 4 were full of eyes all around. When the living creatures moved, the wheels moved beside them. And when the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose. Wherever the Spirit would go, they went. The wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. And over the heads of the living creatures, there was something like a dome, shining like crystal, spread out above their heads. And above the dome, over their heads, there was something like a throne, in appearance like sapphire. And seated above the likeness of a throne was something that seemed like a human form, like the bow in a cloud on a rainy day. Such was the appearance of the splendor all around. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard the voice of someone speaking. He said to me, "O mortal, stand up on your feet, and I will speak to you." And when he spoke to me, a spirit entered into me and set me on my feet. And I heard him speaking to me. Wow, thank you for hanging in there. Talk about strange. What a remarkable, incomprehensible image of God showing up in Ezekiel's life. There's a lot to say about this passage. We could talk firstly about how vast and incomprehensible God is. A great cloud with brightness around it, fire flashing in the middle of the fire, something gleaming like amber, 4 living creatures, human form, 4 faces. It's incomprehensible. People have tried to draw this image and it doesn't make any sense. In some ways, this is a beautiful idea. We don't want a manageable God, a small God who fits into our pocket, a mascot who simply cheerleads us in the things that we're already doing, a God who serves a political purpose. No, we need a God that upends everything, a God who is truly God, not a God who is understandable or incomprehensible. It was St. Anselm who said that if we could understand or describe who God is, he would no longer be God. Friends, when we talk about God, we are talking about someone who is incomprehensible to us. And that's what we need. The second thing we see in this passage here is that God is real. The word that is used is glorious. He says, this is the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. Glory means weight, heaviness, realness. God is real. Now, we can't see God, obviously, but that doesn't mean that there is a weight and a heaviness to God. In fact, when we go through the world, it is God's weight that most moves and shapes the world around us, even though we don't see him. We need to come to grips with this idea that God is not just an idea, God is not just a concept, God is not just a pleasant fantasy. God is real. Thirdly, we see that God speaks. We see that God says to Ezekiel, this massive, incomprehensible vision, God speaks directly to Ezekiel. The transcendence and beauty, the glory of God is combined with an ability to be personal, to connect with us. Friends, when life seems strange, we have a direct line of communication with the one who holds all things together. So those are all powerful images that come up here, and we could probably spend a sermon on each one of these concepts. But the strangest thing I want to point out today is this. Did you notice it in the reading? Amidst all the language of fire and four creatures and lightning and rainbows, there were wheels. Did you pick that up? Ezekiel says, I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures, one for each of the four of them. As for the appearance of the wheels, their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl, and their rims were tall and awesome. If you love cars, this probably excites you, the idea of God riding around on a throne with wheels, with rims that are high and awesome. Isn't that a strange idea? That Ezekiel, sitting in Babylon, contemplating the emptiness, the strangeness of where his life was, all of a sudden he sees a vision of God on wheels. I don't think there was anything in Ezekiel's life that prepared him for that. You don't see God on wheels anywhere else in the Bible, but here it is, God showing up on wheels. That's strange, right? But this is the heart of Ezekiel's vision. What's Ezekiel's story? He was in Jerusalem. He was where God was. He was at the temple. Everything made sense. But his life has been thrown into disarray, and he's moved to Babylon. And now he's in exile, far away from his homeland, from his temple, from his religion, from his understanding of God. God no longer fits into the new life that he has. And yet God shows up there. God on wheels is able to come where Ezekiel is. God, who rolls through the desert from Jerusalem all the way to Babylon, has come to meet Ezekiel and all his people when everything has fallen apart. Friends, God is incomprehensible and strange, and there are times when we need that. Not a God who fits into our well-managed lives, who gives tidy moral instruction, who keeps our agendas ticking, but a real God who is free to show up in the mess of your life and mine, so that when the whole managed life that you had planned on has fallen apart, God is still able, maybe especially able, to show up there and then. Because that's what we need the most, isn't it? Not advice, not moral guidance, not a solution. We need to meet God. And sometimes it's in the midst of our confusion, our wounds, our perplexity, the strangeness of life, the God who is free, who is mobile, whose rims are high and awesome, rolls up and meets us in the strangest of places. Friends, we are tempted to dumb God down, smooth God out, tie God up, and explain God away. But God is God, a sovereign power who shows up wherever he wills, not at our beck and call, but God with us. That's the vision of Ezekiel. God with us in everything. God with us. Emmanuel. And that, of course, is Jesus' name as well. And could there be a God any stranger than Jesus? A God who did not stay in heaven but came down, who showed up where he was not supposed to be, in a manger, in a stable, born to a poor young woman, who was both God and human, who showed the glory of God, the power of God, who spoke with authority, who went to the cross, the strangest of all places, to find a God. And in the strangeness of that moment brings victory from defeat and life from death. God comes to us where we are as we need him. Friends, over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about this strange God who shows up and meets us where we are. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.